Pierce, thanks so much for being available to talk. You are the PM lead, right, for Visual Studio Code and Copilot?
That's correct. Yeah. So I joined the team last December. So I'm actually relatively new to the VSCode team. The VSCode team has been very stable throughout its history. And so I'm actually one of the more recent additions to the team. Before that, I worked on other developer things at Microsoft. So I worked on languages like .NET and TypeScript, other developer tools like Visual Studio. I built VS Code extensions before I took this job. And I also worked on Azure as well. So I did a ton of developer things at Microsoft, and I actually joined Microsoft via an acquisition of a company called Xamarin, which was cross-platform mobile dev in C#.
Cool, yeah. And you kind of got into this role at this really pivotal time when AI is transforming everything we do in software development, and took on this challenge of leading through this change.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly energizing and also challenging in many ways, right? Because everything is changing. Like, what does it mean to be a developer? What is code? Like, is that an artifact? Is that where I spend most of my time? And obviously, like, working on VSCode, it's the world's largest editor, right, in terms of usage. And so reasoning about all the things we do, we know they have a big impact on how developers write software every single day. And so we take like great responsibility in that. And that's very exciting, but also, as you might imagine, brings some stress as well, trying to reason about what do we even do in VSCode with all this change.
I can imagine. And how do you actually make decisions when you have to balance between, just having good taste, having some principles that you follow, serving all these different communities, from like huge enterprise teams to solo developers? How do you make decisions, especially when you have to act so fast now?
So it's interesting because like before I joined the VSCode team, I always thought I'd worked at Microsoft for a long time. And of course, big companies have very particular ways of doing things. And the VSCode team kind of had this like bottoms up planning. Like if I work on terminal, I know terminal and the issues in the space in terminal better than me, right? Like I have to know a little about a lot, right? And so we do kind of this bottom up planning approach where every single engineer for their area is bringing features up. And then also like Kai and I will meet and we'll say, okay, like, what are our assumptions in this space? So we're constantly like stating our assumptions on like, okay, we think that this will happen. It may be a bad assumption, but you have to have some principles about how you reason about the world. And based off these assumptions, kind of at a high level, where do we need to go? And you kind of have to meld those together, right? And then, of course, there's things happening competitively that, you have to respond to as well. And so kind of it is very difficult. But I actually think the nice thing is you just kind of have to accept you're going to make a ton of mistakes, right?
Yeah.
And the way that VS Code is always shipped, we ship every day, right, to VS Code insiders. We can learn. We're going to make mistakes, right? And because we're shipping every month, because we're planning every month, the nice thing is a bad planning mistake is actually not quite as bad as like maybe another product, because when you have these rapid iteration cycles, right, it's very easy to learn and recover from kind of missteps that you take. So it's kind of interesting that like the way the team always actually worked has really set the team up for success in this moment.
Yeah, it's a really good approach. And I think especially your developers developing for developers.
That's
And
right. Yeah.
at least it's not like completely foreign to you. What are their expectations?
That's right. Yeah. And I think like a lot of product building is taste, right? Like you can't really look at a matrix of features and say, this is what we need to build. And just like, we're not machines, right? Like you have to impart taste upon the product. And I think a big part of taste is you have to deeply empathize with your users. And that's like a very like cliche thing to say. And like a lot of people think that comes from looking at, data or like feedback themes, like qualitative feedback. And of course we use those as signals, but like really like all of us are developers, right? Building for ourselves. And if anything in the product feels off, like we get personally pissed off about it. We're like, I don't like how that UX works. Like, let's talk about it, right? Let's make it better. And I think you really have to have that conviction and kind of like so deeply empathize with your users to build really great things.
One thing that kind of really characterized the last kind of period of the last few months of Visual Studio Code and Copilot is your commitment to openness.
Yes.
It was open sourcing the chat extension, opening to many different models.
Yes.
Kind of being quite good with adopting and implementing standards, if it's MCP or now AgentsMD and others. I can imagine this this is also a bit challenging, right?
For sure.
So I think and I know many other developers really appreciate this. It's what makes Visual Studio Code and now Copilot so attractive. But it means you need to always balance between kind of rushing forward, implementing new things, innovating, and pulling back and figuring out how do I synchronize with the rest of the community, with
Yep.
standardization efforts. How do you approach that?
Very challenging. But again, like it's actually like you often don't realize in the moment when a team makes a decision about their culture, about the impacts it will make, like, because you can't know, none of us have, can see into the future. And I think actually the way the team works, like, okay, we had always been an open source, right? That's a big part of our culture. We had always been about standards, like whether it's LSP, the debugger adapter protocol, like that's always been a big part of how we think about building VS Code, right? And in many ways, like I think we've talked about this a little bit, but VS Code, like Copilot was, if we say AI is where we're going as developers, and we say that VS Code needs to become an AI editor because that's what it means to be a developer, then there was kind of this like narrative conflict, right? Of like, we believe in our team. It's not even just like as a product. It's like every single person on this team deeply believes in open source, right? And so there's almost like this narrative violation in the team of like, before we were open source, of like, VS Code is open source. We think the future is this AI stuff, but this AI stuff is closed source right now, right? And so, separate from even like, the business, the product, the community, like I think all of us, like as people who, the whole reason we work here is because we believe so much in this product and openness. That was very difficult for all of us, right? Because that was a big part of kind of our culture. And so in many ways, like open sourcing Copilot Chat just was natural, right? That was exactly like what feels like how we want to work. And so in terms of the challenges, like, actually, I feel like because our team is like one of the world's largest and most contributed to repos on GitHub, right? The challenges actually for the openness angle are much more, we have more issues, right? And we have a bigger surface area that we have to maintain. And I think it's actually, because of the pace of AI innovation, it's very challenging because then, VS Code, not that it was ever moving slow, right? But like it was a different pace of life after, before the AI time. It was easier like to think about things like, okay, the community is proposing this thing. How do we actually like, is this the right thing to do? Do we accept this PR, right? And you can kind of actually like think much more deeply about those things. But now when everything is changing every single day, like how do you think about those things at the scale that we're operating at? It is quite challenging.
One of the things I noticed, for example, in the latest release, you moved from just bring your own key to providers can contribute their own extensions,
That's
kind
right.
of packaging their models. And that's a really nice model that worked already for Visual Studio Code in that you can't manage everything yourself. You create a platform, you invite people to build on top of this. Is this something that you see like as a solution to how you continue moving in this pace as AI develops?
Definitely. Yeah. Like, it's not just about being open source. It's about opening up APIs and the product itself to kind of this platform approach, like you said, which again is very natural to us, right? Like VS Code, you download the editor, there's nothing there, right? It's choose your own adventure, which is good and bad, by the way. Like there's different kind of implications of that statement of like, especially with AI now, like to some extent, a lot of people don't know what they don't know. And so having some opinion imparted upon you is actually in some ways good. But yeah, like you download VS Code, there's no extensions. Okay, I have to go get extensions. And so like we kind of think similarly about like some of the AI stuff, like with bring your own key, it's like, okay, we've always kind of gave developers the choice. Like you can install, okay, VS Code is made by Microsoft, but you can install AWS and GCP tools into VS Code. Like same thing with like the models. Like we're not going to support all the models in the product. We try. It's very challenging, right? There's always going to be a model that someone wants to use that we don't provide, right? And the GitHub Copilot subscription. Okay, well, the obvious thing is like, okay, let's give people an API. It took us longer than we wanted to actually finalize it, but we got it out the door and we have like Hugging Face building on this, Cerebrus Systems building on this. There's a ton of other kind of partners that I can't talk about right now that are also building extensions for this. So we're super excited because like then, yeah, like no matter kind of your preferences about what model to use, or not even just the model, but the inference stack, right? Like in the case of Cerebrus, they're using a lot of open source models, but like they're super fast. And if you really want to say the most important thing to me is speed, okay, Cerebrus is a really great provider. Go and get the extension, give your API key, boom, you're using Cerebrus inside of VS Code with Copilot Chat.
Yeah. one of the things you've done recently is integrate a bit more between VS Code and this interactive tool and the hosted GitHub Copilot coding agent. And now it's almost like a seamless integration between kind of starting in interactive
Yeah.
mode and then delegating something. How do you think about designing the kind of AI tools that are less interactive? Because obviously, once you ship something to a remote coding agent, this is it. It's there. You can't influence it anymore.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, I think we're all kind of figuring this out right now. But it's interesting because you do make different choices, right? Like, okay, in the agent, not everyone partners with the agent in this way inside of VS Code, but okay, we're constantly streaming in the input we get back from the model, right? The tool calls, the text, right? And you can kind of steer the agent, right? If you notice it going off track, stop. Okay, actually, I want you to do this. I don't like that you're doing this. I want you to do that. And so there's a kind of different interaction pattern you have there because some people are kind of watching that thing intently and saying, I don't like what's happening here. I want to fix it. And also speed is quite important, right? Like that. So we spend a ton of time, like, it's not just like things in VS Code. Like we have the whole stack that we're optimizing, like in Azure with the cloud providers we work with to serve some of the other models inside of our Copilot API to get things like time to first token down and total turn time down and reduce errors. And so you do so much work to try and make it super fast. And not saying like that is very important for the local experience. But then when you think about something like the remote Copilot coding agent, you actually have kind of a different set of considerations. Because generally when you're delegating something, like you don't have to synchronously view that's the whole point of delegation, right? And so then it's like, okay, things like reasoning, right? You can really kind of play with different reasoning efforts. And there's a different set of considerations. Like it's okay, actually, if the model doesn't get back to me right away. It's okay if the model kind of tries different things and takes 40 minutes to get to my resolution. Like that's not a big deal. But if you hit a prompt in VS Code, it took 40 minutes to get an answer, right? That's kind of challenging, right? Like, so you really have to kind of think about for each model and kind of the user experience you're designing for, like the set of trade-offs you're making. And it's also hard because every single model also has its own set of trade-offs you're making, right? And so it's very difficult. But I think like the thing we're trying to do is we know that people are going to have local agents. They're going to have remote agents. They're going to have agents provided by VS Code. They're going to have agents provided by other people. It's just natural. Like people use multiple cloud providers. You're going to use multiple agents, right? And so we really want VS Code to be like your workbench for doing all of your work. And so I think kind of to the assumptions point, like that is one of our assumptions. You will have more agents. And so we really have been trying to kind of come up with interaction patterns, like the chat sessions view we introduced recently, where you can basically see all of your agentic interactions in one place, which is like one step, right? But then you're like, now I have like 15 open tabs. Like that's its own kind of like frustrating thing to work through. And so I think like we ship, we learn, we ship, we learn, and that's kind of the pattern we're going as we start thinking about some of integrating some of these other agents inside of VS Code.
Yeah, it's almost like VS Code is becoming like the shell or like the dashboard for many different agents.
Yeah, and I mean, we think we're very deeply convicted that like developers need to stay in the loop, right? That and VS Code is the place as a developer I work, right? Yeah. And there's many things I can do in VS Code. Like people partner with agents differently. Some people, like I said, are very like, I want to monitor everything. Some people now are like, they spend way more time. They're not even looking at the agent. They're just spending all their time reviewing code. Then it's like, okay, in VS Code, how do we think about how we make code review really great? Because it's like, okay, agents are awesome, but like as a developer, is my favorite thing in life code review? Like, no, right? And so like, there's like this joy element that like we want to keep about being a developer, even if you choose to work that way, right? Which I would actually say I'm more on the spectrum of like, I like giving things to agents and I spend more time in review. And so I'm actually more of that person. And like, I'm at the same time very happy, but also conflicted, right? Because it's like the code review thing, it was not made like for, you know, the agents producing hundreds of PRs, right? Like that's not what I want my life to be, is managing all this. And so we have to kind of think about all those things and like, how do we build those patterns into VS Code that make you more productive? Yes. But also like, we all want to enjoy what we do, right? We became developers because we love developing things. And like, so keeping that joy in the process is super important to us.
Yeah, that's interesting. It has to feel nice if you want people to be productive.
Yeah. I mean, like just as a human, right? Like, I don't want to do things if it's not fun, right? Like, we don't want being a developer to be laborious, right? Like you want it to be fun and interesting and like that's the thing with me for agents is I just have so much fun because I'm building way more than I ever have, right? And so for me, it's very exciting. But then you start thinking, especially when you get to these multi-agent flows, right? Like I think I told you about my workflow. Like I'm building this AI coloring book app for my son and daughter, and it basically takes like a real photo and it converts it to a coloring book page. And then you can kind of take all these photos, you can package them into photo books, and we also have like a digital canvas, or you can print it out, old school, and actually use it. And the interesting pattern of like how I work with the agents is I'll actually kick off like, I'll say, I want to do this. I kick off 4 or 5 agents, right? Doing with the exact same prompt or maybe slightly different variations of the prompt. And because it's not deterministic, you get different outputs. Yeah. Then I actually have Vercel wired up to my repo. Boom, 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 open up all the tabs. I can see like my web app running. Okay, I like this. I don't like this. I like this interaction. Okay, then I look at the code. Like, I don't like how you architected this thing. You need to do this. So I basically take all those learnings and then I pull them right back into a new coding agent and basically incorporate them all. But that's like a very different workflow, right? And to your point about like you have to use the product to really understand the flows, like that's like things are changing so fast. Like if you're not constantly playing with like techniques and different ways of working, then you're going to fall behind, right? And so like I think like a lot of people still are like in this AI 1.0 thing of like I did X thing, AI makes it Y faster. But like actually the really interesting thing is like I used to do X thing, but now I can do Y thing that wasn't like it's a totally different way of working. I never imagined was possible. But then obviously as the product builders in VS Code, it's like, what do if I'm going to work in Y way, like it's easy for just speeding up something you already do, but like now we have to reason about, okay, well, what does that mean for the experience you actually have in the product? And it is quite challenging, but that's why we're just trying to move fast. Like we're going to make mistakes and we ship every day to insiders and we learn and we move on with life, right? So yeah, that's kind of how we think about it.
Yeah, I think it's a real challenge in AI. I know that I have this, and I'm very enthusiastic about AI and using it in software development. Sometimes you really have to force yourself to think about things differently.
Yeah,
It doesn't
that's
feel
right.
natural
No.
actually until you do it a few times and iterate on several ways to do it.
Yeah, there's like there's a real, like many of the initial AI innovations in the developer space, like the editor stuff, right? Like Ghost Text, just take it all the way back there. You still can fundamentally work the exact same way you always did when you had Ghost Text, right? You're still in the editor. You're just hitting tab and occasionally get suggestions, right? Or now in the case of next set suggestions, you're hitting tab multiple times because you're getting multiple suggestions. But really the behavior change element isn't there, right? And now, like when you think about agents, like, okay, immediately we showed the chat view, right? Like you open the secondary sidebar. Okay, what the heck do I type in this thing, right? And it's interesting when you watch people because some people are just like, I'm going to not specify what I want at all and hope it all figures it out. Some people are incredibly detailed. And like, there's a lot of behavior change that comes with that, right? And so it's interesting to think about like the patterns we have in the product for like how we help you to kind of manage that behavior change. But like, that's actually one of the really hard things because changing our behaviors is hard as humans, right? And so I think like when I think about the agent stuff, that's actually in many ways the biggest challenge to adoption when I talk to teams is like, this is just a totally different way of doing things, right? And so there's like a training element, there's like a success element, like what works, what doesn't work. And of course, like the other challenge is like, well, what worked a month ago with this model doesn't work today, right? And so it's just, especially for larger teams, it's very, very difficult, right? Because things are just changing so fast.
Yes. And I think that there's an element of nudging. Like I think, for example, you just, when you added this cloud button to the chat,
Yeah.
made it's like an open invitation to people like, hey, try this thing out. Maybe it's going to work for you.
Yeah.
And I actually heard from lots of people like, yeah, I tried. I had like a prompt and I clicked it. Then I realized, oh, that's a new possibility of how to work with AI.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. And I think the interesting thing is like people try these things and generally actually people are very resilient, like as humans. And if you get a good, it's kind of like if you start experimenting with it and you kind of start to have some good outputs, like people very quickly ramp up. Like it's actually quite impressive, like how quickly people, like when we started really rolling out agent as the default mode inside of VS Code, it's interesting to see like how people really, it's not just that, okay, you change the mode. Okay. Right now people use agent instead of ask as the default mode inside of VS Code. It's not just that, and more people are using the agent, but you also actually see the interaction patterns change, right? Like they're doing many more prompts, right? And they're iterating more, and you can kind of see that ramp over time of how people engage more deeply with the product. And it's super interesting because on the one hand, yes, it is a challenge, but on the other hand, like developers, like we always have to figure stuff out. There's always new tech, there's always new tools. And so it's kind of built into our DNA that like, this is just how it is. Like the tech that I work on today in 5 years, like that might be obsolete. That's just the way it works as a developer. So in many ways, we're just kind of conditioned to be very good for this moment, actually.
Yes. Please, maybe kind of last thing before we end, just kind of taking a step away from your role as a PM lead. What are you excited about when you think of like where AI is going, especially in software development? What's the flavor of it that you especially like? What's really interesting to you?
I think the thing that is most interesting to me at the moment is that I'm able to, so one of my bad assumptions was, and we've been talking about this a lot this week, is like, I assumed that the programming languages that were most popular, that have the most publicly available training data, that those languages would actually be the ones that would do best with the LLMs. And the very interesting thing is like, actually like some of my best experience with AI have actually been some of the more newer or niche languages, right? And so like, I think as a developer, something that really excites me is I'm actually exploring new languages, new stacks, new things, building different types of apps for different platforms that I would have just like, it's like, I just don't have the time for this, right? And like, I tell the story all the time, like I've long been a mobile developer, dating back to my time at Xamarin, but like, if you gave me a Swift coding interview, I would fail tomorrow. And yet I built 2 Swift apps because as developers, once you know how to write, code, you can read the code pretty well, like in most languages, right? And so like I can read the Swift code, but I can't write the Swift code. And so like it's super interesting because like then you start playing with all these kind of new things. So that's very interesting. I think the other one is there's many parts of being a developer that I kind of hate. Like I love it for the most part, but like, we talk a lot about this concept of toil, right? And like, what are the parts of being a developer that I hate and I despise, right? And like environment setup, right? Like that sucks. So like, how do we make that better with AI? Like the code review thing we talked about, like, and some of these problems actually get worse with AI, right? Like the code review topic. And so like, we really have to, it's exciting to me actually to think about like, well, how do we make that better? Especially because like, okay, the obvious thing is like, oh, you throw agent at code review, which like, that's a thing we're doing. Like we have AI merge conflict resolution. We have AI code review inside of VSCode, but then it's like, okay, then it's my job to review the agent code review of itself, right? Like, and so it's very difficult, but I think at the same time, like it's very exciting because not that things didn't change in developer land, they have, right? Like our space always has moved very fast, but like, I feel like a new sense of energy because it's like, no, literally it's all changing, right? What it means to be a developer. And like that, depending on your personality, that can be something that you kind of draw back from and you're like, this is scary to me. Or you can like kind of lean in and be like, this is very exciting. And like, yeah, everything's going to change in like an exciting way. And like separate from like the developer stuff, I'm very excited about what it means for humanity. Like I use ChatGPT for therapy. Maybe this is not the thing I should be doing, but like, I even find myself using it for stuff like that. Or like my kid's playing with a dino toy and he's like, well, what dino is this? I'm like, I don't know all the different dinos, like even silly things like that, right? You're like, that's an Erasmosaurus. And my son is so excited about it. And so like, I don't know, like even the things that I thought we would do a year ago in VS Code, like if you asked me to write out a year roadmap, we didn't do it. It was totally different, right? So like even thinking like 2 months ahead is hard, thinking 6 months ahead is really hard, and thinking a year ahead, you're like, I have no idea. And kind of accepting, like having the humility to be like, I don't have any idea is in some ways like the best thing you can do, because if you are overconfident, then that creates its own issues, right?
And there's every sign that it's not going to slow down. So
No.
we better get used to it.
That's right. And it's only speeding up. Like, when I first joined the team, okay, we have a model ship every month, every other month, right? Now we have a model shipping seemingly every week, right? And, we didn't really talk about this, but there's a lot that goes into shipping those models. It's not just like, oh, we connect to API, model shows in product, right? Of course, that's part of it. But like, you also have to think about like, there's science challenges, like how do you prompt it? How do you evaluate the model? How do you say what the good and bad traits are of a model? Is something good or bad? How do you optimize the speed and the user interaction? How do you optimize the infrastructure, right? And think about capacity and like really optimizing that side of things. So there's just like a lot of things, right? That are super interesting about that. And so like, as we get more models. That's also increasing our capabilities of what's possible. Like a year and a half ago, well, yeah, there was no agent mode, right? In any product. Now it's like, duh, like what is your product if you don't have this thing, right? And so what is the model capability that will exist in 3 to 6 months that doesn't exist today? That will be the new thing that when we look back a year from now, when we're sitting in this conversation, we're like, how why would I live without this thing, right? So yeah, it's very, very exciting.
Cool. Piers, thank you so much. I really love the work you're doing with Visual Studio Code and GitHub Copilot. I think I know a lot of people in the communities I'm part of really appreciate it. So thank you.
Yeah, the team is doing a great job, and thanks for having me.